Hello and welcome to the Data for Subscriptions podcast, where we explore how to run better subscription businesses and what that takes. I'm your host, Bela Bonyan, and today I have the pleasure of welcoming Mark Salvani to the show. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here today.
So today we're going to focus on the three most common challenges manufacturing companies face when they run as a service models and then how we can turn them into success factors. Before we get into the topic, Mark, why don't we spend a few minutes where you can tell us your experience of running as a service business models and what led you to start GrowthBeam?
Yes, certainly. So, I have been more than 25 years running services business. I started with in field services. I run ESCOs, private partnerships, PPAs in the renewable energy sector. And for the last 12 years, I was helping Signify, the former Philips Lighting, transition, grow and transform from one of the top conventional lighting manufacturers to the undisputed leader in lighting and connected lighting and lighting services. And that's why I think that thanks to the transition of the lighting industry that was forced because of the technological innovation of LED, I felt that other companies, other manufacturing companies, with the advent of the industrial revolution, had to still to go through that transformation. So I decided to found GrowthBeam and help them transition in the least painful way. I would say.
So let's jump right in. What are the three most common challenges that you see manufacturers company face?
Yes, in my view, it's all and nothing. It is the first one. It will be all and nothing, and I am not saying all or nothing, and we will expand on that later. Then it's an unfit IT and revenue management stack. And probably last but not least, I would say a huge cultural resistance to change towards services.
And we're highlighting specifically manufacturing companies when we talk running or want to accelerate their as a service business models. How can we do so? Because of course, there are many companies that are running these kind of recurring business models, whether they're called subscriptions or as a service. How come you think that manufacturing companies have specific type of challenges?
Well, I think it's based on their DNA. You need to think about product companies have been developing products, some of them for more than 100 years, and you have generations of employees, generations of leadership teams, completely, I would say, designed to just fulfill the business model. So whenever you try to go with innovative business models that require that kind of change, is very difficult for companies to go and embark on that transformation.
As opposed to, for example, internet-born companies, let's say some of the examples that we have in the world today, companies that have grown massively large over the past 15, 20 years, software companies.
Yes, you need to realize that something. I mean, it's most of these companies as a service, of software as a service, SaaS. Most of these companies, most of the, I would say, successful companies are just successful because we're designed for that. They started with a clean slate, with a white piece of paper. Okay, let's create this whatever as a service business model. And just because of that, they do not have to face all the hurdles and obstacles that, for instance, an industrial manufacturing company that has been for, life for 50, 60, 100 years has to overcome.
And this question is extremely important. This is why we're spending a few minutes on it, because it could be a topic that we just quickly pass on, saying that the company has been existing for 50 to 100 years. But this, in fact, will turn out to be the main underlying reason. I mean, the muscle that brought the company here is the same muscle that is also creating some of the frictions and challenges. But with that said, Mark, why don't we jump into the first challenge, which you call the all and nothing issue
Yes.
challenge. What is it to begin with?
Yes. So, I mean, first of all, you need to imagine an actual company making the request. And the request, you will have a leadership team saying, well, we've heard about services. We think that we need to go towards services. So their request would be, okay, what do we need to do? What will be our reward and by when? And most of the time when these manufacturing companies, the product companies do these requests, they do it to they ask it to an internal team. And to the best of their knowledge, the internal team will say, well, we have been doing some research and you need to start changing sales, marketing, R&D, development, operations, IT. There's a huge price tag attached to that, and there's a massive effort attached to that level of transformation. And when they come to answer, okay, the reward and by when, they will say, well, I mean, the reward is in a nutshell, whatever you were making today, just slice it over time, and then well, we'll see whether that sticks in. And and that's a real problem, because then it poses the all and nothing, I would say, answer. You need to change everything, and perhaps you will not be getting anything also at all. And that creates a huge, I would say, a huge risk aversion, and also I would say, on the way these companies are designed, is just a no-go business. And this
Yeah,
is where you get the biggest problem.
it becomes an innovation stifler or innovation killer, if you will, because what I saw in this space is you end up with too big of a transformation task, which means that first and foremost, it creates these very slow processes and initiatives that are hard to get off the ground. And often in combination with the fact that it just becomes too big of a risk and cost involved, because as you were saying a few minutes ago, we already have an existing business serving existing customers, and you certainly don't want to interfere with that lifeblood.
Yeah.
Can you give perhaps an example of where you've been working with a company and how that manifested itself? How did it hold the company back from accelerating as a service business?
Yes, I think that just going back to that point, you need to understand that that very first request and answer actually freezes organizations, freezes leadership teams. It's not about being risk averse. This is about the fear of looking dumb in front of your peers. So that's a very powerful mistake you're doing, but just by exploring. What I've seen so far is that because of that, within my own company's prospects and sales pipeline, I would say that more than maybe 90% of my sales pipeline is affected by that. I see a lot of internal teams trying to fight for budget just to try to break down or to just break loose from that initial misconception. And it's not that much of an investment. If you could just to break that myth, it's no more than potential an internal team of site. So it's nothing more than that. But still, people are very afraid to ask because of, well, this all and nothing kind of challenge.
In your previous experience when you were at Philips, what was the success factor? Because that was a successful journey. How did you guys turn this potential risk into a positive driver? What did
Yes.
you do different?
I think that, I mean, we face the same challenges as everyone, but I think that one of the key factor on, for instance, on Signify, and I will go a little bit deep on LaaS is that, well, first of all, LaaS, light as a service, has existed for a long time. I mean, I was doing LaaS 25 years ago when we did conventional lighting in the municipality lighting infrastructure. What is different now? What has changed and what Signify has done well? Well, the technology, and that is applicable now to other sectors. Technology is pushing manufacturers to take an active role in service because of the complexity of the technology and also the cycles of innovation. It's very limited situations and industries and sectors the industry can keep up with the level of innovation. So Signify took an active role on managing the risks of technology and the cycles of innovation, therefore took the responsibility of de-risk certain aspects. That's why it took an active role on LaaS. It took an active role on solving few aspects of the proposition to the towards the end users and the sales channels themselves.
So there was a maturity of technology, and there was a connection, of course, to the value that can be provided specifically to its customers. And then off the back of that, it was proper risk management, what you're saying is of the project. But to me, it sounds like for many companies, and it seems to be for Signify as well, is one needs to have a clear line of sight. What is the triggering event or the driver for doing it? And although it sounds like pretty obvious that we say so, what I mean by that is if you see growth declining in your, let's say, traditional model, and you have a goal to accelerate growth, and that will be a carrot or the driver to pursue an alternative path. Now, I think one of the other areas where it leads into perhaps too big of initiatives in one go, because I think that's literally what we're speaking about here, is truly understanding the needs and drivers on the customer side. Because if you understand their needs clearly enough, then we can start by attaching to those needs as opposed to trying to convince all of the customers and transform all of our business in one go, which effectively then creates a complete overhaul of one's business, which is back to the all and nothing challenge. I guess my question back to you is, do you see any challenges on the customer side where you've seen some resistance or slowness in adopting an alternative model?
Yes, I think that, first of all, technology innovation, the speed in which we innovate affects everyone, affects both businesses and affects both customers. Some of the biggest issue that sometimes the product-centered companies are facing is that their R&D teams are focusing a lot on innovating, and they're constantly, I would say, sending new features and new innovations that the market may not be ready for them. So that's the biggest problem, and you can see it, for instance, now with IoT in general. Without even talking about, you can see in certain industries, in certain sectors, that the speed in which the consumer, being industrial, being B2B or being B2C, is accepting and adopting IoT solutions is not at the same pace as the industry is releasing such. So that's unfortunate, and that's why product companies or companies in general need to really think about how to pair the data, connectivity, insights with real problem solving towards the customer.
Perhaps that's a good bridge to the next challenge that you mentioned, which is unfit IT and revenue management stack. And the bridge that I see is that now we're going to pivot towards speaking about that data has an important role in all of this, as we're speaking about as a service. But the key question here is we need to integrate as a service offerings into an existing financial reporting system. Back to the main point you raised early on, which is that we're manufacturing companies, we're dealing with businesses that have been around for a long time with an existing business serving existing customers, and they have an existing revenue management and IT system. Why don't you articulate for us and help us understand why this is such a huge issue in integrating as a service models into this financial reporting systems?
Yes, I mean, first of all, you need to, in my view, it's a matter of design. So organizational design. Product companies are designed to report, for instance, product sales, product cycles, and as a result, I mean, their own recognition. At the same time, services companies are designed to report services sales with their own services cycles and recognition. Historically, for services companies trying to report product sales, that has been more or less easy. Now, when you have a product company trying to do the same thing, they will mostly encounter three issues. The first one is how to quote to cash, how to create those quotes that ultimately will turn into cash. Then how to manage if you get into type of services, if you get into a type of recurrent revenue, how to make those entitlements, how to link those entitlements to potentially contracts. And at the end, if you happen to integrate IoT, if you happen to have an IoT solution, how to work or how to integrate the usage data of those devices in order to create future usable insights for your customer. So those are the three things that I would mention product companies are facing right now.
Let's double click on that, because I think there is quite a lot to unpack there. If we start with the quote to cash process, can you expand on what particularly is the challenge for product companies who wants to turn as a service?
Yes, I think that the product companies, the initial process will start with companies creating service SKUs. Those SKUs will come from a bill of materials that will more or less have been benchmarked or proxied against certain quotes and services, and that's a good start. Everyone will understand. Okay, yes, I'm selling products now. I'm productizing my services. You will start selling those productized services. Now the problem is, okay, once you are selling those, once you have created those deals, how they feed back to your financial reporting. And then is when, and why am I saying this? It's again, the all and nothing. You will have, internal teams will have a lot of pressure to just prove their worth, prove a type of return on investment on the initiatives or selling services, but they would not have done the homework on how to move those services sales and how to fit them into their product, I would say, product tailor-made financial.
Yeah, exactly. What would be, for those listening and thinking, okay, I recognize this kind of a financial system or revenue management system. What is it that we need in a quote to cash stack that is more adapted to as a service models? What are we looking for here? What are the capabilities that we're looking for here?
Well, I mean, first of all, you need to start, I would say, shopping around in what's the best, I would say, the best solution. You have to run away from trying to do it yourself. You need to start thinking about how to integrate to other systems. Also, something that I'll talk later, maybe you need to only focus on certain markets, certain products, certain value propositions, you may need to do it in a very focused way. It's product companies all tend to think about massive scales and massive implementation at a global reach. So you need to start thinking about, well, segmenting even your implementation. So that's the first part. You need to start thinking about an incremental approach, and you need to be open to start changing as you go, because the type of service or the type of service that you're quoting today may change few months down the line.
And I'm happy that you raised that, because from our vantage point, we talk about agility and flexibility in the quote to cash stack. And why we say that is, if we simplify at least, that in a transactional model, you sell once, and then there might be support and maintenance, of course, involved. But with an as a service model, first and foremost, majority of companies want to be able to adapt their offerings to the extent they can, because it at least increases the chance of attaching and selling to a customer. That's one factor. The other one is what you raised yourself, is that there is lots of customizations that you're able to do with an as a service or recurring model. And you want that, in fact.
Yeah.
Because that again creates this, what everybody talks about, personalized offering, but sometimes we're really not clear what does that actually mean. But what it means, you have tons of levers you can pull on. Now, the challenge is that if you have a system that is designed not for this, we can now start to see why a lot of companies sit with tons of manual efforts to try to cope with this. And this is why you hear examples of Excel spreadsheets being sent back and forth between different departments, where you're trying to correlate line by line to make sure that the data points are correct. This is literally, again, a simplified view we're giving. This is what we mean having a fit for fight. Let's call it a quote to cash stack. Let's talk a bit more about entitlements. Break it down to us why this specifically is a challenge that you've called out.
Yes, I mean, entitlements touch upon few topics. I mean, so the first one is imagine that you have them. You ultimately you have sold something that gives you the possibility to just manage customer entitlements. But once you've done that, it's first of all, it's how to manage a direct relationship with a customer when I used not to have a relationship with. That's the first one. All of a sudden, you were doing everything through your channel partners, you were doing wholesale, you didn't care about the end user, but all of a sudden now you have to manage the commercial relationship or just the relationship with your end customer. Now, let's suppose that you just solve that, but the next one is, how do I invoice now in a recurrent way when I used not to do it in a recurrent way? I was doing only one-offs. The next one would be, how do I either renew or stop service depending on my customer's choice? Also, you need to prepare for that. I mean, it's once you were used to sell something, you more or less you would forget. Just extreme cases you would forget, but now you're forced to continue with that relationship. And ultimately, imagine that you have all of that. That's how do I feed all these assets as revenue and liabilities and obligations to service back to my financial reporting. So all of that linked to entitlements, it's a huge amount of noise to whatever company even thinking about going on a services or servitization journey.
Again, I think an interesting observation from my view was that entitlements can be turned into a huge customer satisfaction and growth lever, but it can also act as the opposite. So again, what we want to do, we want to make sure that from a customer standpoint, we want to make sure there's transparency. You know what your service levels are and what you're able to use. In some good practices we see in the market, there are customers out there or companies out there that are actually flagging for you as a customer, be it business or consumer, saying you're actually using less than what you have right to. Perhaps it is so that you don't need that same capacity or application support, whatever it might be. So we propose that we reduce the cost for you for a period. Conversely, you want to make sure that any customers that hits their ceiling and maybe want to do more, that you can proactively suggest the opposite. Perhaps you need a bit more. So again, these things that we're simplifying requires enormous amount of intelligence and sophistication in your data flows in your quote to cash to be able to do that.
Yes. And imagine it's a massive amount of work that you're not used to. You're not wired to think about these things, because the nature of your business for the last 20, 30 years was completely another.
And let's talk about the third topic. And IoT data has been, a topic since 15 years, it seems like, but you still raised it. But you actually added the handling of usage data coming from IoT sensors. Why is this why is this a particular challenge as you see it?
Yes, I mean, in my personal view, IoT sensors or IoT data comes from the fact that we could actually collect it. So just because, and it could be very controversial, but just because we could doesn't mean we should. But suppose that, okay, you've done the investment on collecting IoT data. So imagine the first challenge would be that, well, you are able to collect it. Once you collect it, you're able to structure it in a way that it allows you to turn that usage data into insights. This by itself, it's a massive task. Again, you would have R&D teams within your product-focused companies thinking about features, thinking about, okay, I can collect X, Y, and Z. I can do X, Y, and Z with my hardware, not Y. And that's the biggest issue. So imagine that you can do it, and imagine that you can extract that into insights. Now it comes the real challenge, because the second would be, once you have your insights, you can develop new services with those insights, which is perfect. But most of those insights, maybe more than half of those insights, will be devoted to improve your current products, to improve how you do things, or how you can, I would say, develop better products for the service that you already providing, or the new services that you want to provide. And that does not give additional revenue as we're used to do or used to have in a product based company. Therefore, in the heads of the leadership teams, most of these are just costs with not incremental revenue, and this is something very very difficult to swallow for different leadership teams.
I guess the challenge when it comes to IoT data is that we're speaking about so many different sources of data that each and one might have their own requirements. They might have different formats. So there's just a practical aspect to how we can collect and structure all of that data. That's one issue.
Yeah.
The other aspect, which I find interesting that you raise, is what to do with that data. Granted, if we can make sure that we can collect and structure it in a way that it becomes meaningful for us. And I'm tempted to go back to the industry that you were in before. You spoke about lighting as a service, but let's say a use case that we can, if we add on climate or energy as a service solutions, and we look at real estate, big facilities, where you have tons of different sensors that are constantly picking up air quality, heating, or the how cold it is, air conditioning.
Yeah.
And you have elevators, the usage of elevators at what point of day and time. lighting, as you mentioned. How can we use this kind of data to play back a value to a customer? Do you have an example of where you work with a client, or maybe perhaps from your previous experience, where you collected this data and turned it back into a value statement for a customer to kind of support the as a service journey?
Yes, I think that, I mean, first of all, as a starting point, I think we are at the infancy of creating insights using IoT sensing data or usage data. We're still at the very, very early stage. What I've seen doing is product companies using usage data in order to improve, for instance, their field services operations, trying to gain optimization gains. As a result, the customer will have better service at a lower cost. At the same time, I'm seeing companies, the manufacturing industry, learning to use IoT data in order to improve their predictive maintenance capabilities. So, and again, in order to disrupt as minimum as possible the customer operations. And even going further a little bit into trying to manage better the life cycle of the products, or even the design of the products or the components within those products, depending on the application, depending on the usage, depending on the technology. The products will be developed, designed to fit that specific use. I could see that so far in preventive maintenance and field services, I was seeing a constantly improvement of 10% on operations on a large pool of customers, but that's still a way to. There's still a lot of room to improve now that we're tapping into circular economy, refurbishments, recycling, and upgrades of equipment.
Just to toss in some more numbers for our listeners. So one of the clients that we've been working with, printing as a service company, I think pretty hands-on for most of us because we're used to these kind of devices for years. Over a 2-year duration, having addressed some of the challenges you raised, they saw a growth of 26% and a 48% customer satisfaction NPS improvement. That's a pretty decent outcome for that duration of time. So these are the types of, and now we're just touching two factors. We're not touching examples such as increased efficiencies, because they could actually put their resources into other tasks than necessarily chasing down data points through manual efforts. So there's a lot for companies to really improve in this space. Mark, let's go to the third challenge that you mentioned, and that is the cultural resistance. Tell us more about what specifically, and I'm curious to understand when we say cultural resistance, because it's a big term. Are we speaking at all levels in a company, or are we speaking specific themes and issues?
Yeah, I think first of all, when talking about cultural resistance, you need to understand where those specific companies, where those specific industries come from. What's the story? What's the DNA? How they have been evolving, and of course, the level of evolution has rapidly sped up within the last 10, 15 years. But there's still a lot of DNA ingrained in that, and as a result, I would say, first of all, it's all over the place. You may have few very progressive leaders trying to drive the change themselves, but I would say that it's at all levels. You can have, from the C-suite having huge resistance just because it affects a lot the current way of doing business, and it's something that sometimes we take for granted. Sometimes we think, well, you know what, the once we find a nice product market fit, everything will be solved just by that. But you really need to focus on the culture of resistance from at all levels of the organization.
What's the success formula? Tell us one or two examples you've seen within companies that you feel are good learnings for us to take with us to kind of break through this challenge.
Yes, I think that first of all, you need to, as an entire company and at the top level, you need to accept the fact that you need to change. That's one, that you will have to change. Now, remember when we were talking about the all and nothing?
Yes.
Most of the times when we talk about change, product companies think, oh gosh, we need to change everything. And that's not the case by far. You really need to be selective. You need to really pause and think, okay, where do I want to focus? What products do I want to dedicate for service or for as a service? What are the markets I want to be active in? What are the customer segment? So you have to be ready not to change, but to add. By adding, I mentioned you need to add advanced services and probably as a service business model. Also, you need not to neglect your product development efforts, and your R&D. You need to really be conscious. You need to protect your product teams, but you need to tell them, because some of them will be really, I would say, discouraged, and they will think, oh man, we're going on all as a service. You need to really set the foundation that a good service, a good as a service offering value proposition will be fundamented into exceptional products. Now, those exceptional products need to be, the way you develop those products need to change a little bit towards a customer, a better customer in intimacy, right? And I think that by having the combination of, as a summary, change, keep developing good products, and be selective, this is the recipe to more or less navigate a servitization journey within an industrial manufacturing company.
So, Mark, as a final section and wrapping up, I wanted to ask you what three things we should take with us from this discussion today for anybody listening and want to kind of step up there as a service game and accelerate that and improve it. But I'm tempted to kind of give playback what I believe I've heard from you, and you can see how well I've captured that. I think what I heard from you today is the following, and it's almost to start where we left it with the final question just before this section. First, make sure that your financial goals and incentives, that they're right and realistic from day one. Second, I think we need to think ahead in terms of where we want to be in a couple of years down the road. Say 3 years down the road, where do we want to be as a business? And be highly specific, is what you're saying. Be specific in what segments, with what type of customers, with what products, how are we delighting them? And I think this point is particularly important, is because when you put that flag in the sand 3 years down the road with clear ambitions, goals, financial goals, incentives, then the third takeaway is over-index on your enablers to get you there. And I'll explain what I mean with the enablers. The big section we spoke about is how do you make sure that you have the right systems in place? You called it an unfit IT and revenue management stack. But the gist of it was you need to make sure that your revenue management stack, the data that flows through it, enables you to take the right decisions act quickly to serve the customers based on the model that you serve them with, because it's all data driven. You want to be efficient doing so. You want to learn from that data. You want to make sure that you constantly improve and adapt your offering. And that's why I said over index on the enablers, as opposed to the challenge that we spoke about, which was typically it becomes a blocker.
Yeah. It's more about, if I may say on this, it's more about how we get rid of the idea of that being a noise, and how to embrace those enablers into to help us change and going forward and further with our transformation on servitization.
Fantastic. With that, Mark, thank you so much for the conversation today. I greatly appreciate it, and thank you for sharing your insights.
More than welcome. It was a blast having being here.
Thank you.
Thanks.